our next step in our workflow, and that is what we call handover. We now need to hand this project over to the next people in the chain, the next people who are going to do their bit on this film. And that, in this case, is going to be audio, grade, and VFX. There's a little bit of rotoscoping and cleanup work maybe is going to be done. There's a proper audio person's going to take a look at this and do a kind of full-blown mix. And then we've also got the colorist who's going to go on and make this look a lot better than it currently looks. And then we're going to take it back. So here is what we're going to do. First, we're going to look at handing a project over to another Resolve user. Let's, for argument's sake, say that we're handing over to someone working in Fairlight, to someone working in Fusion, which is the VFX one, and then someone who's going to work in the color panel to perform the grade. Let's take a look at how we shift a project from one workstation to the next. Remember, Resolve doesn't save project files in the same way as other software. It's all hidden away in that internal database. So we are going to have to export this project into an external file which we can then hand over. And here is what we're going to do. We are going to export an archive of this project. For argument's sake, we're going to say that all of these files here are good enough to go to VFX and grade. So we're just going to make an archive and hand it over. So first, let's actually talk about what an archive is. You've already imported an archive file, a .darchive file, yeah? A DaVinci Resolve archive is the project file, and also every single item used in that edit saved into the same folder. When you restore DaVinci Resolve archive, it will open up the project and place it in your project manager window in here, and it will then automatically relink all of the assets used, so you can then just pick up the edit from where it went and then just keep going. Basically, you can pick up the edit from where the last person left off, or in this case, the next 3 people further on down the chain are going to pick up our edit and finish the job with VFX, grade, and audio. So in order to export an archive, I need to click the house in the bottom right down here. This opens up my project manager window. And what I also want to do is I want to right click on here. This is the project I currently have open. Anything with a tick on it anything with an orange tick on it is currently open. I want to right click and I need to choose Export Project Archive. It will ask you if you want to save first. The answer is always yes. And then it's going to ask you where you want to output it. So this is where I've been keeping everything for the course that I'm currently teaching. I'm just going to make a new one here. So in this case, I'm just going to say demo archive export. There we go. And then it will make a new folder. So this is the one that you've got here, Jim Candy Demo Project for Students. That's the one I've supplied you with. I'm then going to just make this. It will create the folder by itself and then populate it for us. We just hit save. And then it will ask us, what do we want to include in the archive? I'm not going to include render cache or optimized media, because that will make the file much, much bigger. And the truth is, if we've been using optimized media, the VFX guy and the colorist, they're not going to need that because they're going to have much bigger workstations. Colorists and VFX people have seriously powerful workstations. Okay, so we don't need to include our render cache or our optimized media for this one. And then I'm going to hit OK. And Resolve is going to take a few minutes to copy all of the media files, and that counts for audio as well as video, into the new location, into a folder. And what we can do is that we can actually just zip that folder and export it. So I'm going to cut ahead to where Resolve is finished exporting its archive, and I will see you in a second. Okay, that's now done. So I'm going to take a look at my files, and I want to go to Workspace F. Jim Candy for Learners. You can see everything I've set out here now. So here's my demo archive export. This contains everything. There's the project and also all of the media files as well in a way that Resolve can understand. All I need to do is export this as a .rar, a zip file. So I right click. I'm going to choose send to compressed zip folder. And this can take a few minutes depending on the machine you've got, and you might hear my machine spinning up in the background, as I'm sure you've heard it before, because I'm on a laptop now and it's quite difficult to separate it out from the condenser mic I use. Anyway, this is going to do its thing. And here it's done. I can now put this on a drive. In fact, if I'm putting it on a drive, I don't need to compress it first and then post it. Or alternatively, now I can use something like WeTransfer, FileMonkey, or MyAirBridge to send this archive to the next person in the project, and then they can unzip it, import it in the exact same way you did, and then carry on from there. So this is how we hand a project over to another Resolve user. In the next few lectures, we're going to look at handover to other bits of software, and then we're going to look at title, credits, and final export. So click on through to the next lecture. Okay, so we need to hand this project over to someone else, but in order to do that, especially if they're using other software, we need to be able to export either a reference file or what we call a baked master if we're sending this out to somebody grading in a different bit of software. So we're going to take a look at the Deliver panel in this lecture. This is where we export our project, our final project, but we also can use it to export intermediary files that still have some practical use in our workflow. To open up the Deliver panel, in the lower right there's a little rocket ship icon down here. Just give it a click, and here we see the Deliver panel. So let's go over what we're looking at. In the center we have our viewer showing us what is under the playhead, simple enough. We have a thumbnail list here, and this is every single video shot in our edit, and it's showing us the first frame of each one. We can navigate our edit by clicking on the thumbnail, and it will jump the playhead forward to the start of that particular clip. Below that again we have a timeline. We cannot make any changes on the timeline in the Deliver panel, only in the Edit or Cut panels, okay? So we can't make any tweaks here. So that's the middle three. On the left we have all of our export settings, and on the right we have our render queue. So let's set this job up to render. I want to export what we call an offline reference file, and that is something that we send along to either the grade or the sound mix, and it provides a visual reference for when either the audio mixer is working, or it allows the colorist to make sure that when they reconstruct the edit on their end, it is in fact correct. So the offline reference file is extremely important, and we're going to do an offline reference. Then we will do what we call a baked master, which is very similar but with a higher quality codec. So up here I need to set my export settings. I'm going to click the video tab, and up here at the top I have two options. I have single clip and individual clips. I want single clip to be selected here. That's going to export the whole thing as a single file. Individual clips is for a reconform at the end of what we call the online-offline round trip, and we're going to cover that in a later project. So for now, I want single clip. I'm going to give this a name, and it's going to be Jim Candy underscore offline in block capitals. And that's going to let any other users know that this is an offline reference file. That is a very standard naming convention for this kind of file. So down here I then want to choose my format, which is my container. We have things like DPX, JPEG 2000 and MP4. I'm going to stick with QuickTime. And then we have our codec, and as we've only covered either ProRes, DNX or H.264, an offline reference file is very commonly H.264. The other people, they don't actually work on that file. The file only exists to give them some kind of a reference as to the edit that they should be working on. They continue to work with these raw files or with these audio files. Yeah, they don't actually work with the file that we are currently making. So I'm going to choose codec H.264. I have an NVIDIA card, so I've got a very quick way to encode H.264. And then resolution, I'm going to leave it at 1080. I'm going to leave my frame rate at 25. Down here we have quality, and we can leave it at best. That will make a big file. If I'm sending this online through WeTransfer and the like, I want to make a smaller file. Again, they're never going to actually work directly with this file. It's only a visual reference. So I'm going to hit restrict to, and I'm going to type in 15,000 down here. And that's roughly constricts it to, or restricts it to about 15 megabits per second. There will be a lecture on bitrate and data rate later on, so don't worry too much about this now. Basically, a bigger number makes a bigger file, but is higher quality. A lower number, a smaller file, but is lower quality. That's all. And because this is only a reference, it does not need to be high quality. It just needs to be easy to send. Everything else I'm going to leave alone. For now, that's enough. So the last thing I want to do is hit this browse button because I want to choose where I am exporting this to. So I'm going to go into my D and then deliverables and then resolve editing Udemy course, and these are all the things that I've recorded, but I'm just going to export my file here for now, just for demonstration purposes. I'll then hit save. Now, this hasn't rendered out the project. It's not started anything rendering out just yet. I'm going to hit the Add to Render Queue button. And when I do that, all of this is saved and put into a job item up here on the right-hand side. And this is my render queue. The render queue basically lists all the jobs down here that have not yet been rendered and allows me to choose one, any, or all of them to render out as I see fit. I need to click on a job so that it is highlighted in white and therefore active. This is the one place where the highlight isn't orange in Resolve, which is frustrating. And then I need to hit Start Render, and then Resolve will take a few minutes to render out the project. These jobs have not been rendered until we select them and hit this button. Okay, you haven't exported anything until you have done this. So I'm going to hit Start Render and then come back when it's done. Now I have a beast of a machine, so it's not going to take long to export this project. In fact, I might not even cut through this just so I can boast about how good my workstation is. Look at that go. And there we have a whole film rendered out in 18 seconds. You can hear it just beginning to spin up after it's finished. So that's now exported our offline reference file, and we can send that along to our colorist and to our sound designer or mixer alongside either of the XML or AAF files we're going to make in the next 2 lectures. So this has been a good overview of the Deliver panel. And next we will look at what we call a baked master file, and after that we will look at the XML and AAF files, which are instrumental in handover to different software. So go ahead and click on through to the next lecture once you're ready. Right, so we've taken a look at an offline reference file and also at the AAF and XML formats as well. What we now want to look at is generating a baked master file for the grade, because this is the easiest way of handing a simple project over to a colorist. Now, there's a bit of a checklist here. We only want to do this for projects which are ideally shorter than 5 minutes and that don't have any crossfades or stylized transitions in video. Audio stuff doesn't matter. In fact, we are going to render this one out without audio, and we're going to go over the audio settings in the delivery panel as well. Now, the big thing about the Baked Master file is that we need to use a good codec. Baked Master files are quite big. They're usually in either DNxHR 12-bit or they're in ProRes 4x4 or ProRes 422HQ. So let's start by choosing a decent codec for this one. I'm going to leave my format at QuickTime, and under codec I'm going to choose DNxHR. And what I actually want to choose is either DNxHR 10-bit or DNxHR 12-bit. We will go over bit depth later in the course. So for now, let's choose DNxHR 12-bit. This project was shot on a Blackmagic Design Cinecam, and it was captured in Blackmagic DNG RAW at 12-bit. So we would want to match the bit depth of the raw footage when doing this. That's the general rule. Okay? So now I want to make sure I'm rendering out only a single clip, because I'm going to send this whole thing over to a colorist, and what they'll do is they'll use an auto scene detector utility like the one in Resolve to cut it back into chunks. So now I've got the correct video codec. I have several tabs here. I've got video, audio, and file, and they might just be a little bit higher up. Just scroll up and down to find them if you can't quite see them. I'm going to choose audio. Now, make sure that you have export audio checked if you want to export audio. I've made that mistake before. It's always super embarrassing, right? Because this is being sent to a colorist, they have no use for audio in most cases. So I'm going to uncheck this for only this render. I'm going to reinstate this later on. But whilst we're here, let's take a quick look at the other audio settings. We have Linear PCM, which is a pretty good audio codec, and we have AAC, which is more compressed. I'm going to stick with Linear PCM, even though I'm deactivating this later. We'll just take a look at this just here. And down here we have output track. I'm going to leave this at main 1 stereo because that's what we've been mixing with, is our main output. We're not going to cover things like buses and submixes in this course. That's Fairlight stuff, that's audio engineer and sound designer stuff, not offline editor stuff. Okay? So we're going to leave all of that alone. This default of main 1 is fine unless we've set up multiple main outputs or we've got some really complicated submixes for whatever reason, in which case your audio person will be able to walk you through that. Go and ask them for advice on that particular project. Everything else here I'm going to leave as is, and then I'm going to go back into audio. I'm going to uncheck audio and then go back into video, I should say. And then I'm going to call this Jim Candy Baked Master. And then I will browse and output this to where we made our offline. Save, hit add to render queue, and then I need to select it and hit start render. If we have multiple jobs up here, we might want to clean up this list. I just hit the X in the upper right of the little grey brick, which signifies the job, and it will be deleted. So now I need to select this job and I need to render it out. And this should take a little bit longer, around about a minute to 30 seconds on this machine anyway, because it is a very high spec. So I will cut forwards through this. And there we're done with the render. You can probably hear my machine spinning up in the background there because it's just had to pull out all the stops to do a fast render. So we can now send this project to our colorist on a drive or through some kind of online transfer utility. If we're sending a Baked Master file, we do not need to send an XML or an AAF. This is a much easier way of handing a project over to another colorist for our grading work. We don't need to hand anything else over. alongside it. And this only works for the grade. We can't hand a baked master over to effects people. We cannot hand a baked master over to audio people. The baked master is only good for the grade. So we've now gone through everything we would need to do to hand our project over to someone else. Next, we're going to take a look at how we receive our project back, and then after that we're going to do some simple titling and a bit of a credit roll, and then a final export, and we will be finished with this project. So well done for getting this far, and click on through to the next lecture once you're ready. Okay, so we're very nearly there. We know how to make an offline reference file that's going to be of use to either our sound mixer or our colorist later on. But now we need to know, how do we hand this project over to someone who is not working in DaVinci Resolve? What if our audio engineer is in Pro Tools, which is very likely? Or what if our colorist is in, I don't know, Premiere Pro, which would be insane, but it's hypothetical, right? You're very likely to get colorists also working in DaVinci Resolve, but we're going to cover the XML handover just in case. So we can't deliver a project file or an archive to people working with different software. We have to deliver a kind of file that allows our edits to be reconstructed in different software, and then the other people further on down the chain can continue with their jobs. And we're going to look at the two big ones. We're going to look at the XML, and that is what we use to hand over to someone working in either Adobe or Final Cut Pro X. And we will also look at the AAF, which is what we use to hand over to someone working in either Avid or in Pro Tools. So we're going to start with the easier one first. Well, they're both fairly simple because there are limited controls within Resolve for them, but we're going to take a look at the XML first. So I need to be on the Edit panel for this to work. I need to go up to File, and then to Export, AAF, XML, etc. Or the keyboard shortcut for this is Control or Command and Shift and the letter O. Here, I now have a dialog that allows me to choose what I'm going to export. And this Save as Type here, I need to click on this and choose exactly what I want. We have a number of different files we can choose from. Now, if you're handing over to someone working in Adobe, you need to choose FCP 7 XML v5, okay? Because the FCPX XML doesn't work in Adobe. It has to be this one. It has to be FCP 7 XML v5, okay? I'm going to, let's say, we're going to hand over to someone working in Adobe, and the practice for this is the same for Final Cut X, just we use FCP XML 1.8 for that is all. So I'm going to give it a name, and then I will save it. Now, the XML file itself is actually a text document. It does not contain the media necessary to reconstruct the edit, so you are going to have to get all of your rushes and audio together on a drive or zip it together and then send it along with the XML file and the offline reference file that we've made. That is extremely important. The offline reference allows the person on the other end to cross-reference their, what we call a conform, the edit that comes out of an XML or an AAF. It allows them to check that against what we know we have over here, which is what we exported into the offline reference file. So do be sure that you send a proper offline reference file as well as an XML or an AAF and all of your assets as well, because the file, the AAF or the XML file by default does not contain any media, and XML files cannot contain any media when exported out of Resolve. So you have to send that over as well. Now we'll just take a quick look at the AAF, which from Resolve is very similar. You have a lot more control in Avid when you're dealing with AAFs, but for now we're just going to take a quick look. In this drop down here, I just need to choose .aaf file, and then it's exactly the same. Give it a name, export it, send all of your media over as well. In Avid, there's the option to actually embed media within an AAF so that an AAF behaves a little bit like an archive file, but that functionality within Resolve is somewhat limited, so we do just have to send everything else along with it as well. We'll save that. I did a previous dry run and that will test it. There we go. And it will give me this log. Only AAF imported timeline can be exported as an updated AAF. A new AAF will be generated. AAFs work differently from XMLs. It used to be that we had to get an AAF and bring it in, and then when we exported a new one, we would actually update the old one. We wouldn't create a new file. Resolve can now create AAF files from scratch, so this is no longer a problem, and you will get this log and then just hit close. After that, put the AAF on a drive along with all of the relevant assets and send it over to your sound person or your Avid person, and they will do their bit on their end. So, this is a relatively simple look at handing over to other software users. The big one is likely to be audio handover to Avid users. I need to warn you there can be a few complications when doing that from Resolve as of the time of this recording. If complications arise, you need to talk to your Pro Tools and your Avid user and see what they recommend, because different projects can go slightly wrong in different ways and they may have their own preferred workaround for it. So do keep in contact with them if anything idiosyncratic goes wrong with the project. Okay? So, next we're going to take a look at a baked master delivery for color grading, and then we're done with our part of the handover. After that, we're going to take a look at how we get the finalized project back into Resolve so we can do our titling, our credits, and our final export. So click on through to the next lecture once you're ready. Okay, so this is a minor one, but who knows, it could be useful at some point. New to Resolve 17 is the ability to export individual timelines and bins and use those exported files to copy timelines and bins between different projects on your own machine or to send them to other users elsewhere, provided that they also have access to the material needed for the project. We're going to take a look at bins first, then we'll take a look at timelines, and this won't take too long, it's fairly simple. So I've got my Scene 3 Cafe folder or bin from the Jim Candy edit. I'm going to right click and choose Export Bin. And it's going to come out as a .drb, DaVinci Resolve bin file. Now, it's important to state that this is not like an archive. It does not contain any footage. You're not going to be able to magically email a bin to someone super quick. If they don't have the rushes on their end, this is going to create a bin full of offline media. Okay? So this is only about sending the bin structure over. This is about exporting files which detail an organized structure of assets over, and that's all. They do not include the assets themselves. I personally think that a big improvement to this would be the ability to make like small archives which can then be incorporated into projects so that you can export all of the material alongside the bin, but currently that does not happen. This is all that happens. You only make the file for the bin, no material is included by default, or at all, actually. You would have to zip up a file, a folder full of clips and send that along with it if that's what you wanted to do. So we'll just hit save here, and that will export it, and that's fine. Now if I jump into a different project, and Scary Crows is a color grading demonstration project, you should not worry about not having that in the edit course. What I can do is I can go File, Import, and then choose Bin. Then I can go, there we go, Scene 3 Cafe, and then that appears, and all of the sub-bins are there as well. Now remember, all of these assets are here because they are still on my machine. Resolve has their last known location, and it is still valid at the point at which I chose to import that bin file. If you send this file to another user, even if they have the material, they will have to relink all of the material in the bin once it is imported. And that's as simple as just selecting, right-clicking, and choosing Relink Selected Clips and pointing Resolve at the bin that contains them. That's all you need to do. So we'll also take a look at timelines. If I go into the timelines bin here, I've got my timeline. This just contains an XML conform. I can go onto timelines, and now if you right click and export, you don't get the option you want, which is really annoying. You have to select it and go up to File, Export, Timeline, and there's a keyboard shortcut for that, which is Control or Command as well as Shift and the letter O. Now when we export a timeline, it can export as all of the XML, AAF and EDL file types, as well as a DaVinci Resolve timeline file. Now a .drt is exactly like a bin file. It's going to recreate the timeline when we import it, but it's not going to include any material. So we have to send the material over with it if that's what we're trying to do with a user at a distance. Down here we have HDR profiles. We don't worry about those because we're not going to cover HDR in the editing course. That's a color thing. So DaVinci Resolve timeline file, and then we just find somewhere to spit it out. I'm going to be very, very bad and just put that in my Scratch folder just so I have somewhere to put it, and then hit save. And if I want to import that timeline, I just go to another project and then File, Import, Timeline. And this is the same command or Control and Shift I that lets us import XMLs as well if you're into color, but we'll just go Find, Resolve Scratch, scarycrows.drt, open, and just give it a second. And give it more than a second, actually. There we go. And then in timelines, I should, or whatever. There we go. Here's my Scary Crows timeline in here. Now the color settings for it are different in this project, which is why it looks different from the way it did normally, but we don't cover much color in this course. If you want color, there's the color grading course. And that's essentially it. We just have to remember that we're not actually exporting material with these files. That's all. We need to send the material along with them if we're sending these to someone who doesn't have the files. These are a good way to send projects back to a client that has the material. These make my life much easier. So if a client sends me the material to work on, I can just do my grading work, then delivery to the client is emailing this file because I just email the timeline or the grade or the edit, everything is already there. They have the material, they just relink it all and boom, that's it, handover. I don't need to we transfer them a load of graded media which can take a few hours. So this is actually quite useful. It certainly is a bit more targeted than just sending entire projects over. It has its use cases. It's not super commonly used. It's good for corporate ad people like me who work in web ads, basically. If you work in long form or serial, it's probably not going to be that useful, but who knows? It's good to be aware of it. Right, so that's a nice little addition to Resolve 17. We're going to call it there for this lecture, so click on through to the next one. Right, we are right at the final hurdle. We're going to look at taking delivery from the grade and from the sound mix and just reassembling it here in Resolve, and then we are going to take a look at some basic titling and a little bit of a credit roll as well, and then we're done after this final delivery and we are finished. So up here I've got a baked master, and we're going to say that this is the final graded version that's come back from the colorist. It's been delivered in a high quality codec but with no audio. And here I have the full sound mix of the project. It's been sent back by the audio specialist, and it contains the full stereo mix that we put down plus whatever they've done, and then we have to attach these two things together again. Now, this is dead simple. I've made a new timeline here called Final Assembly in my timelines bin. You can see I've now got one called Final Assembly. And I just need to put these two things on top of each other in sync, which is quite simple. I'm going to drag the graded video down, and then I'm going to drag the audio down, make it work this time. And there we now have the graded video delivered from Color and VFX, and we have the final sound mix delivered from audio. And these two are now in sync. We need to go through and check it.
Come on, Wayne, maintain the tempo. Let's make that flabbiness fabulous.
Nice. So we've got this, and it's all back in place. I'm going to add a basic title here. We've got a nice long dolly shot, tracking shot here. I'm going to put a title on, and then it's going to fade off as we start to track across, and then we're going to take a look at making a simple little credit roll down here. So let's take a look at titling first, and in order to do that we need to open up the effects library. I want to go into my toolbox, and scroll down until we find titles, and I just want to make a basic text title here. So all I need to do is click on text and drag it above here, and you can see that it will behave as though it were a footage item. It will behave as though it's an edit, and I can click and drag the sides and it will give me a preview of where the title actually ends. So let's zoom in and choose a better place for it. So I want about 1 second in, and I want it to last about 4 seconds maybe. So it's here, and then it's gone. I'm going to make it fade out, and what I might actually do is drag it forward to about 6 seconds. And back to 0, and I'm going to have 1 second fade in, 1 second fade out maybe, and we'll see what we think. But before I do that, I'm going to get the actual title itself in place. I need to click on it to select the title effect, and then I need to open up the inspector, and the inspector then allows me to make all of these changes down here. We're going to keep this simple for now, so I'm just going to say Jim Candy. I can type whatever I like into this window and it will appear in the frame. I then have font family, and I can choose all the different fonts that I like. There's something about that that's kind of okay. It looks a bit cheap though, so. And choosing a font takes forever. That one I quite like. I like the kind of more light-hearted ones, but we're going to keep this. I'm just going to stick to Arial, I think. Modern is apparently nothing. So let's just stick to Arial, keep it basic and readable. So I can put my text up here. I can choose bold, italic, or both. I think I like bold. I can choose my color. I simply click on this box and then I click and drag to the color that I like. So I could make it a slightly off yellow, just to kind of fit in with the background here. The size slider lets me scale this in and out, so let's make it fairly easy to read. Tracking stretches the letters out and increases the space between the letters, and line spacing increases the vertical space between multiple lines. So I can increase the space between two lines. I can make everything kind of run together, although that's never a good idea. And the same with the line with the tracking as well. And down here we have all kinds of other options. We're going to leave most of these alone except for position and zoom, so I'm going to bring the Y down a little so it's a bit more central, and zoom will uniformly scale everything in or out. We have a rotation, not particularly useful. And down here we have a drop shadow effect, and the drop shadow we can't initially see because it's immediately behind the text. I need to change the offset in order to see the drop shadow. Then I can increase the blur and drop the opacity just so it helps separate our title from the background a little bit. And there's lots of other stuff down here, but I'm going to leave that alone for now. Just going to make a very, very basic standard title in here. It's worth noting everything with a diamond next to it can be keyframed. So that's my title. I want it to fade in by 1 second, so I can type in plus 25. Oops, make sure I have nothing selected. Plus 25, jump my playhead forwards by 1 second, and drag my fader into my playhead. And then it wants to be on there for 4 seconds, so I go plus 400, and then I will drag my other fade slider into there. And now we have our basic title. And it may be that I decide, oops, what am I doing? Plus 100. Maybe I shift it forwards by a second so we have a bit of dead space. There we go, it comes in. It fades out, and then we get on with the rest of the project. So that's our title. The last thing we are going to do is to take a look at making credits. So let's go all the way to the end, and we will take a look at adding a credit roll. So to make a credit roll, first I recommend that you type all of your credits out in a Word document, because we can just copy and paste that text directly into Resolve. Over here we have a text scroll effect, and I'm just going to drag that on right at the end of the project. And the text scroll, the way this works is basically whatever text is in here in the text box will scroll from bottom to top over the duration of the text scroll item in the timeline. This is how we dictate how fast things scroll along. So if I drag this out, it's going to move slowly, and if I drag this in, it's going to move very quickly. So let's say I want about 15 seconds for my credit roll. I'm going to click on that, choose the right hand side and go plus 1500. Okay, fine, I'll just drag it out in that case. Just trying to look clever. So I've got stuff on my clipboard. I'm literally just going to paste in, and I've got all of my credits in there. I can then, there we go, I need to do a little bit of spring cleaning here though. First off, let's get the size down, and let's also fix this little offset. It's right on the side of the screen here, which I don't like, so I'm just going to select this. I'm going to go from text to video here, And on position, I'm just going to wholesale move it over to the right a little bit so I have a nice little margin down there. And then that's enough. And we can even, maybe if we want to lean into the joke a little bit, we can start playing the credits over here, and we can fade the video out to black. So, and then we'll fade the audio out as well. And there we now have our credits rolling up at the end of our film. So we are finally there. We've got titles, we've got audio, we've got our edit, and we've got our credits as well. So we are finally ready for our final export, which will be the last step for this particular project. So click on through to the next lecture once you're ready. Right, we're finally done and we're finished, so let's do our final export. Now there's only really one thing to cover in this lecture, and the rest is basically saying congratulations. So let's get on with the last little bit of demonstration we need first. I'm going to go to QuickTime and H.264. I'm going to set my encoder to NVIDIA. If you don't have an NVIDIA card, that will not be an option. Native produces the same result, but albeit a little bit more slowly. So down here we have our quality setting, and I'm going to hit restrict to, and I'm going to choose about 14,000 kilobits per second in this window. YouTube recommends for 25 and 30 frames per second content that you deliver at about 10 megabits per second. That's 10,000 kilobits per second, or 10,000 kilobits, or 10,000 in this box down here. For high frame rate stuff, so 50 and 60 frames per second, it recommends 15,000 in this little box down here. Now I like to go a little bit higher because the VP92 compression can be a bit brutal sometimes. Now I recommend about 14,000 in this little box here for 1080, 25 or 30 frames per second content, and I recommend around 18,000 for 1080, 50 or 60 frames per second content. And after that we simply render out as a single clip. Make sure we have export audio checked, we don't want to make that mistake. And then we give it a name and a render destination. I'm going to call this one Jim Candy Final. Add to render queue, then select that, hit start render. So we've now finished our first project. Very well done indeed. It's always a big undertaking to take on any kind of edit project, especially if it's a drama like this, because there's a lot to be done in terms of audio, there's a lot to be done in terms of organizing our project. So I hope this was a really good grounding in the essential edit skills in Resolve, but this course does not end there. Now, if you are an early adopter and you've made it this far, you might be wondering where the rest of the content is. Don't worry. Every month I'm going to update this course with new modules and also new practical projects. So, once I've had chance to make the next module, go ahead and click on through to the next lecture once you're ready. Right, we're finally done and we're finished, so let's do our final export. Now there's only really one thing